Hello, this is Jack the Ripper speaking. Do you have any idea what it is like to be a ghost while you are still breathing? To walk among thousands and know that not a single soul truly sees you? London in 1888. It was not a city. It was a beast. A vast, soot-stained leviathan that breathed coal smoke and exhaled despair. You look back at it now through the golden lens of history, thinking of Queen Victoria and her empire of lace. But the empire didn't live in Buckingham Palace. The empire's heart was beating in the mud of the East End. And that heart was rotting. Close your eyes. Can you smell it? It is a scent you never forget. It's the smell of the Thames at low tide, fecal, metallic, ancient. It's the smell of the slaughterhouses in Aldgate, where the blood of cattle runs into the gutters to mix with the rain. It's the smell of cheap gin, the kind that burns the throat and numbs the mind, sold for pennies in every corner of Whitechapel. I walked those streets. I was a shadow among shadows. I watched the unfortunates, the women the world had forgotten long before I ever found them. They lived in the doss houses, paying fourpence for a bed or tuppence to lean against a taut rope just so they wouldn't collapse in the mud. Think of that, a life so reduced that your only dignity is a rope under your armpits in a room full of snoring, dying strangers. People ask me why, as if there is a simple answer. As if a man wakes up one morning and decides to become the devil. But I didn't become the devil. I simply stopped pretending to be a man. The summer of 1888 was a pressure cooker. The air was thick, humid, and angry. There were riots in Trafalgar Square. The police were hated. The Jews and the Irish were blamed for the lack of work. And in the middle of this chaos, I found my purpose. I realized that London needed a surgeon, not one to heal its wounds, but one to open them up so the rot could finally drain out. I remember the first time I felt the weight of the steel in my pocket. A beautiful, long-bladed knife, medical grade. It felt correct. It felt like an extension of my own hand. I spent weeks walking through Flower and Dean Street, the wickedest street in the world, they called it. Through the labyrinth of Dorset Street, I learned every alleyway, every blind spot where the gaslights didn't reach, every yard where a scream would be mistaken for the cry of a stray cat. I was waiting for the right moment, the right canvas. And then came August, the month of heat, the month of blood. August 31st, Bucks Row. It was nearly 4 in the morning. The sky wasn't dark, but a bruised, sickly purple. I saw her. Mary Ann Nichols. They called her Polly. She was 43 years old, but in the East End, 43 is an ancient age. She had lost her teeth, she had lost her family, and that night she had lost her fourpence for a bed. She was drunk, that beautiful, blessed state of gin-soaked oblivion. I approached her. I didn't look like a monster. I wore my coat, my hat. I spoke with the tongue of a gentleman. She saw in me a chance for a few more pennies, a chance to stay out of the gutter for one more night. How ironic. "Will you come with me?" I whispered. The street was deserted, a long, narrow corridor of brick and shadow. We walked into the darkest patch, near the gates of the stable yard. I could hear her breathing, ragged, wet, smelling of spirits. She had no idea that she was stepping out of time. She had no idea that within minutes her name would be carved into the memory of the world forever. I reached out. My left hand covered her mouth, not with violence, but with a firm, almost tender pressure. I leaned her back. And then, the knife. Do you know what the throat feels like when it parts? It is like silk. There is a momentary resistance, a slight pop of the skin, and then the blade glides. It is the most honest sound in the world. No words, no lies, just the truth of anatomy. I laid her down gently. I didn't want to soil my clothes. I am a man of neatness, after all. And then I began the work. The police called it vicious. They have no imagination. I was looking for the mechanism. I opened the abdomen, exploring the intricate coils, the hidden clockwork that makes a human being function. In the dark, I couldn't see the colors, but I could feel the heat, the steam rising from her body into the cold night air. It was transcendent. Long silence. The sound of a heart beating slowly, then stopping. I heard footsteps. 2 cartmen, Cross and Paul, coming to work. I didn't panic. I stepped into the shadows, adjusted my tie and walked away. I passed them in the dark. They didn't even look at me. Just another gentleman out for an early stroll. By the time they found her, I was home. I was washing the red from my fingernails in a porcelain basin. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't see a murderer. I saw a man who had finally begun his great work. Polly was the prologue. The book was only just beginning. After Polly, the city changed. It was as if the stones of Whitechapel themselves knew that a new kind of predator was stalking the fog. The police increased their patrols, their heavy boots clattering uselessly against the pavement, their lanterns swinging like pathetic fireflies in a hurricane. They thought they could catch me with numbers. They didn't understand that I was the very air they breathed. A week passed. 7 days of silence. The newspapers began to whisper. Was it a one-time madness, a lover's quarrel, a gang killing? They wanted to dismiss me. They wanted to sleep soundly in their beds. I couldn't allow that. A legend requires consistency. September 8th, 29 Hanbury Street. The night was fading, and the first hints of a grey, miserable dawn were creeping over the rooftops. I found her near the 10 Bells pub. Annie. Dark Annie, they called her. She was sick, coughing into a handkerchief, her body wasted by years of hunger and cheap spirits. She was looking for her bed money, the eternal quest of the Whitechapel woman. I have not a farthing, she told a friend earlier that night. But she had me, and I had everything she needed. We walked to the back of a lodging house, a narrow passage leading to a small enclosed yard. The wooden fence was high, the shadows were deep. We stood there, inches away from families sleeping in the rooms above. Can you imagine the thrill? To perform a miracle while the world sleeps, just a lath and plaster wall away. I didn't waste time with words. I took her by the throat. I felt her pulse, fast, thready, like a trapped bird, and then I silenced it. Annie was different from Polly. With Polly, I was a student. With Annie, I became the professor. I laid her out with her head toward the house. I opened her, truly opened her. I wanted to see the geometry of the human soul. I removed her womb. I held it in my hand. It was cold, heavy, a dark mystery of flesh. Why? Because I wanted to take the very source of life from a place that only knew death. I placed her entrails over her shoulder, a decorative touch. I wanted the man who found her to understand that this was not a murder. This was a dissection. This was a statement. When I left that yard, the sun was actually up. I walked past a man named John Richardson, who was sitting on the very steps I had just crossed. He didn't see the blood on my cuffs. He didn't see the fire in my eyes. I was just a ghost in a long coat, melting into the morning mist of Hanbury Street. The city was now in a state of absolute delicious paralysis. The great beast of London was trembling. Vigilance committees were formed. Men in the streets looked at their own brothers with suspicion. Every man with a black bag was chased by a mob. And the police? Oh, the poor, bumbling Metropolitan Police. Commissioner Warren and his bloodhounds. They were looking for a butcher. They were looking for a madman. They weren't looking for me. I decided it was time to speak. Not with my knife, but with ink. I sat in my room, a quiet, clean room with a view of the rooftops. I had a bottle of red ink, though I toyed with the idea of using the real thing. I wrote the words that would haunt history books for centuries. "Dear boss," I began. I like the irony of it. I am my own boss. I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about leather apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. I laughed as I wrote it. I could see the journalists at the Central News Office, their hands shaking as they held the paper. I promised them a double event. I told them I would clip the ladies' ears off and send them to the police, just for proper. I signed it with the name that came to me in a flash of dark inspiration. A name that sounded like the snap of a bone and the slide of a blade. Jack the Ripper. I posted it. I stood by the red pillar box and watched the postman collect it. He thanked me. He tipped his hat. He was carrying the death warrant of the city's peace in his leather bag, and he smiled at me. But letters are just words, and the public is fickle. They forget. They need a new sensation. The Dear Boss letter was the invitation. The Saucy Jack postcard was the reminder. But the double event, that was to be my symphony. I began to prepare. I sharpened my tools. I bought a new pair of gloves. The end of September was approaching, and I could feel the electricity in the air. The moon was waning. The stage was set for a night that London would never, ever forget. The shut end. Do you feel it? The coldness in your own room right now? That is not a draft. That is me reaching across time. We are halfway through our journey, you and I. We have seen the dawn in Hanbury Street. We have read the letters written in blood. But you haven't seen the worst of it. The night of the 2 stars is coming. The night I proved that I could be in 2 places at once. The night I turned the City of London into my own private theatre of shadows. Are you still with me? Or is the fog getting too thick? Sunday, September 30th, the Sabbath. A day meant for prayer, for rest, for the quiet contemplation of God. But in Whitechapel, God had long ago turned his back. The rain was persistent that night. Not a storm, but a cold, soaking drizzle that clung to your skin like a wet shroud. The streets were slick with a mixture of mud, horse dung, and the black grease of the city. I was restless. The Dear Boss letter had been sent, but the hunger was a living thing inside me. It wasn't enough to write. I had to create. I had promised a double event, and I'm a man who keeps his word. I walked toward Berner Street. It was a strange place, filled with the sounds of music and political debate coming from the International Working Men's Educational Club. People were everywhere, yet no one was watching. That is the secret of London. You can be surrounded by 1,000 eyes and still be utterly invisible, if you know how to wear the shadows. I saw her near the gates of Dutfield's yard. Elizabeth Stride. Long Liz. A tall woman, Swedish by birth, carrying a bouquet of flowers as if she were heading to a wedding rather than her own funeral. She was standing there in the rain, waiting for a miracle. "Good evening, Elizabeth," I whispered. She smiled, a tired, hopeful smile. We stepped into the yard. It was pitch black, a pocket of silence just feet away from the noise of the club. I reached for her. I felt the familiar rush, the clarity that only comes when life is poised on the edge of a blade. But then, fate intervened. Louis Diemschutz, a jewelry salesman. He turned into the yard with his pony and cart. I heard the hooves. I heard the wheels. I had only just finished the first cut, the throat. She was still warm, the blood still pulsing onto the cobbles, but I had no time for the rest. I had to vanish. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched him. I watched him find her. I watched him run for help. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid. I was insulted. My work had been interrupted. My art had been vandalized by a man with a pony and a cart of cheap trinkets. I slipped out of the yard as the shouting began. I should have gone home. The police would be swarming the area within minutes. The double event should have ended there. A failure. But the night was not over. The hunger was screaming now. It demanded satisfaction. Elizabeth Stride was a mere sketch, an unfinished thought. I needed a masterpiece. I ran, not like a thief, but with the purposeful stride of a man on a mission. I crossed from the East End into the city, the square mile, the heart of London's wealth and power. I entered Mitre Square. It was silent. It was clean. It felt like a cathedral compared to the filth of Whitechapel. And there I found her, Catherine Eddowes. She had just been released from the police station for being drunk and disorderly. She was singing to herself, a little tune of defiance against the world. She didn't know that the police had saved her life for a few hours, only to hand her to me. "Come here, Kate," I said. I took her into the corner of the square, the darkest corner. And there I let the beast out of its cage. I had to work fast. The city police patrolled this square every 15 minutes. I had a window of time no larger than a heartbeat. I didn't just kill her. I transformed her. I took her face, the seat of her identity, and I mapped it with my knife. I cut her eyelids, her cheeks, her nose. I wanted her to look like the nightmare she was inhabiting. And then I reached inside. I found the kidney, a small, dark organ. I took it. I took a piece of her ear. I took her soul. When I was finished, I stood up. The rain was washing the blood from the square, but it couldn't wash away what I had done. I heard the footsteps of the watchman, Watkins, approaching. I walked away. I didn't run. I walked with the calm of a man who had just finished a long day's labor. I stopped at a doorway in Goulston Street. I took a piece of Catherine's apron, stained and wet, and I wiped my hands. I looked at the brick wall. I saw a piece of chalk. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." I wrote it. A riddle for the ages, a distraction, a taunt. I left the piece of the apron there, a breadcrumb for the blind dogs of Scotland Yard to find. By the time the sun rose on October 1st, London was in a fever. 2 women dead in one night. The Ripper had kept his promise. I sat in a cafe drinking coffee, listening to the men at the next table talk about the monster. They were terrified. They were exhilarated. And I was the only one in the room who truly knew what it meant to be alive. October, the month of the Great Silence. After the double event, London was no longer a city of people. It was a city of ghosts. Every shadow was a threat. Every footstep behind a stranger was a death sentence. The police were everywhere, thousands of them, and yet I was nowhere. I watched them from my window. I saw the vigilance committees patrolling the streets with their heavy sticks and their lanterns, their eyes wide with a fear that I had gifted them. They were looking for a monster with claws and fangs, a creature from a penny dreadful. They didn't realize that the man they sought was the one who held the door open for them at the bakery, or the one who tipped his hat as he passed them on the stairs. I took a breath in October. I let the city simmer in its own terror. Have you ever noticed how silence is louder than a scream? When I was killing, they knew where I was. When I stopped, they imagined me everywhere. I was in their bedrooms, under their beds, in the very reflection of their mirrors. But I couldn't resist one more communication. Not a boastful letter like the "Dear Boss" note. No, this one had to be different. It had to be primal. October 16th. George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a man who thought he could protect the streets from me. I decided to send him a small token of my esteem. I sat at my table. In front of me was a small cardboard box, and inside that box, resting in a jar of spirits, was the prize I had taken from Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square. Her kidney, or at least half of it. I took a piece of paper. My hand was steady. I didn't use the "Dear Boss" persona this time. That was for the press. This was for the soul. I wrote the words that still make men's blood run cold a century later. From hell. I didn't need a return address. We both knew where I was speaking from. Mr. Lusk, I send you half the kidden I took from one woman and preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out, if you only wart a will longer. I signed it. Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk. I didn't use a stamp. I didn't need to. I left it for him to find. Can you imagine his face? The smell of the wine spirits, the sight of that greyish, shriveled piece of human flesh. He took it to the doctors, of course. Dr. Openshaw at the London hospital. They poked it, they prodded it, they debated whether it was from a human or a dog. They wanted it to be a hoax. They needed it to be a prank. Because the alternative, that I had sat in my kitchen in the heart of their city and fried a piece of a woman I had just slaughtered, was too much for the Victorian mind to bear. It suggested a darkness that no amount of gaslight could ever banish. The rest of October passed in a fever dream. I read the papers every day. They were arresting hundreds of men. John Pizer, the leather apron, a poor, terrified shoemaker. I felt almost sorry for him. Almost. They arrested sailors, butchers, doctors, even a Russian spy. They were grasping at straws, trying to pull a man out of a haystack made of their own incompetence. I walked through the crowds in Commercial Road. I heard them shouting my name. "Jack! Jack! Have you seen Jack?" I wanted to tap them on the shoulder and say, "I am right here." But I didn't. The mystery was far more powerful than the man. I was waiting for the cold. I was waiting for the fog to turn into ice. I was waiting for the final act of my play. You see, I knew that the double event was not the end. It was the crescendo, but every great opera needs a finale, a moment where the performer gives everything he has left. I was looking for the perfect stage. I was looking for Mary. As the leaves fell from the trees in the parks and the nights grew longer and darker, I felt the hunger returning. Not the sharp, jagged hunger of September, but something deeper, something colder. November was coming, and with it, the rain that would wash away the last remnants of my humanity. I was preparing my tools one last time. I was looking for a room with a lock. A room where I could finally, truly be alone with my art. November 9th, Lord Mayor's Day. While the rest of London was celebrating with parades and banners, I was preparing for a private ceremony. The streets were a quagmire of mud and slush. The air was a thick, yellow soup of coal smoke and fog. It was the perfect day for a disappearance. I found her in the early hours, near the 10 Bells. Mary Jane Kelly. She was young, barely 25. She had the face of an angel and the life of a dog. She was wearing a linsey frock and a red shawl, a splash of colour against the grey misery of Dorset Street. She was singing "A Violet I Plucked from Mother's Grave," a sentimental tune, a song about death, though she didn't know it yet. "Will you come with me, Mary?" I asked. "I have no money for the rent," she said, her voice thick with the Welsh hills and too much gin. "My landlord, McCarthy, is looking for his shillings." "I have the shillings," I replied, "and more." We walked to 13 Miller's Court, a tiny, wretched room at the end of a narrow passage. It was a tomb even then. A broken window patched with old rags, a single bed, a small table, a fireplace that held only the dying embers of a few sticks. But for me, it was a sanctuary. It was the first time I had a roof over my head, the first time I didn't have to look over my shoulder for the beat of a policeman's boots. We entered. She lit a candle. The light flickered against the damp walls, casting long, dancing shadows. She felt safe. She thought she had found a patron, a gentleman who would pay her debts and leave her in peace. I let her believe it. I even let her sleep. I sat in the single chair and watched her. I watched her chest rise and fall. I watched the life humming beneath her skin. I waited until the world outside went silent, until the only sound was the rain on the roof and the occasional shout from a drunkard in the court. And then I began. With the others, Polly, Annie, Kate, I was limited. I was a thief of time, stealing moments in the dark. But with Mary, I was a god. I had the whole night. I had the privacy of 4 walls. I didn't just open her. I dismantled her. I took the room and I painted it with her essence. I removed her heart and placed it on the table. I took the flesh from her thighs, the skin from her face. I wanted to see what was underneath the mask of pretty Mary Kelly. I wanted to see the raw, red truth of the human animal. The fire in the grate grew cold. The candle burnt down to a stump of wax. I worked by the rhythmic flash of the lightning outside. I was lost in it. I wasn't a man anymore. I was a force of nature. I was the fog made flesh. I spent hours in that room, rearranging the pieces of a life, creating a vision of horror that would make the strongest men in London vomit when they broke down the door the next morning. When I was finished, I stood in the center of the room. My clothes were ruined, but I felt a strange, terrifying peace. I had reached the limit. There was nothing more I could do to a human body that I hadn't already done. I had reached the summit of my dark mountain. I looked at the window. The rags were fluttering in the wind. I could hear the city waking up, the shouts of the costermongers, the bells of the churches. The world was continuing, unaware that in this one room, the rules of reality had been broken. I washed my hands in the basin. The water turned as dark as a winter sea. I put on my coat, adjusted my hat, and stepped out into the court. I passed a man named Bowyer who was coming to collect the rent. He didn't see the blood on my soul. He just saw a man leaving a room. I walked out of Miller's Court and into the pages of history. I left Mary behind, a broken doll in a room of red. I had given her immortality. No one would have remembered a poor Welsh girl named Mary Kelly, but they will never, ever forget what I made of her. And then, silence. The world waited for December. They waited for another scream in the night, another unfortunate to be found in the slush of a Whitechapel alley. The police remained on high alert. The vigilantes stayed in the streets until their toes froze. But the blade remained in its sheath. The surgeon had finished his rounds. People ask, why did he stop? Did I die? Did I drown myself in the black waters of the Thames like poor Montague John Druitt? Was I locked away in a padded cell in Colney Hatch, screaming at walls that didn't care about my genius? Or did I simply go home? Think about that for a moment. Think about the man sitting next to you on the omnibus. Think about the man who sells you your morning paper, or the doctor who feels your pulse with his cold, steady fingers. What if the monster didn't die? What if he just retired? I had achieved perfection with Mary Jane Kelly. To continue would have been to repeat myself. A true artist knows when the work is complete. I had carved my name into the very bones of London. I had changed the laws of the city. I had forced the wealthy to look at the slums they had created. I was the most famous man in the world, and I didn't even have a face. I spent the years that followed watching my own legend grow. It was a fascinating experience. I read the theories, I saw the names they linked to me. Prince Albert Victor? A charming idea, but far too fragile for the work I did. Sir William Gull, the Queen's physician. A grand conspiracy, but I never needed a carriage or a secret society. I only needed a knife and a dark corner. James Maybrick, the man with the diary, a pathetic forgery. They looked for me in the high places and the low. They looked for a madman, but they never looked for the ordinary man. They never looked for the man who could blend into a crowd like a drop of ink in a bottle of wine. I lived my life. I ate my meals. I walked in the parks. I grew old, while Polly and Annie and the others remained forever young in their cold, stone graves. And as I grew old, I realized something wonderful. I didn't need to kill anymore. The memory of Jack was doing the work for me. I had become a ghost that haunted the English psyche. I became the bogeyman in the closet, the reason children ran home when the lamps were lit. I became a permanent part of the fog. You think you are safe because 100 years have passed. You think the Ripper is a character in a movie, a costume for Halloween, a ghost story to tell over a pint in a Whitechapel pub. But look around you. The darkness I inhabited is still there. The poverty is still there. The way the world treats its unfortunates hasn't changed. You've just found cleaner ways to ignore them. I was the mirror that London didn't want to look into. I am the mirror you still don't want to look into. My name is Jack. I have 1,000 faces and no face at all. I am the silence between your heartbeats. I am the shadow that moves when you turn your head. I was never caught because I was never truly one man. I was the city itself. And as long as there is a London, as long as there is a dark alley and a cold night, I will be there. Do you hear that? The wind is picking up. The fog is rolling in from the river. It's time for me to go back into the shadows, back into the history books, back into your dreams. Good night, London. And remember, mind the shadows.